The grand ballroom of the Hastings estate glowed under crystal chandeliers that scattered light like captured stars across marble floors. 200 of the city's most influential people mingled beneath vaulted ceilings, their laughter echoing off walls adorned with priceless art. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, manicured gardens stretched into darkness, illuminated by strings of lights that made the evening feel like something from a dream. Victor Hastings stood near the piano, his tall frame wrapped in a perfectly tailored midnight blue suit. He held a glass of champagne he had not touched, his dark eyes scanning the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who had hosted 100 such events. At 34, he had already built an empire that stretched across 3 continents. Hastings' properties transformed struggling neighborhoods into thriving communities, and his name appeared regularly in business magazines alongside words like visionary and unstoppable. But tonight was not about business. Tonight was about the Hastings Foundation for Children, a charity his late wife had founded 5 years before her passing. Every year, Victor opened his home to donors and supporters, raising funds for programs that helped children overcome trauma. It was the one night he allowed emotion to crack through his carefully constructed professional facade. Near the grand staircase, partially hidden behind a marble column, sat 8-year-old Emma Hastings. She wore a velvet dress the color of spring roses, her honey-blonde hair pulled back with pearl clips. In her lap rested a leather-bound sketchbook, and her small fingers gripped colored pencils with fierce concentration. She drew with intensity that seemed far too serious for a child, her face reflecting the kind of solemnity that broke hearts. Emma had not spoken a word in 2 years, not since the morning her mother failed to wake up, her heart giving out without warning in the night. Doctors called it selective mutism, a psychological response to trauma. Victor had hired the best child psychologists, tried countless therapies, and spent sleepless nights researching treatments. Nothing had worked. His daughter lived in silence, communicating only through nods, gestures, and the haunting drawings she created. Tonight, Victor watched her from across the room, his chest tight with familiar helplessness. He wondered, not for the first time, if he was failing her, if all his wealth and power meant nothing when he could not bring back her voice. The evening coordinator, a stern woman named Patricia, approached him with a tablet. "There is a situation with the volunteer staff. One of the art station supervisors fell ill. We have a replacement, but she just arrived and seems rather unprepared for an event of this caliber." Victor nodded absently, his attention still on Emma. "Handle it as you see fit. This is your area of expertise." Patricia pursed her lips and walked away, clearly disapproving of something. Victor turned back to his guests, shaking hands and accepting congratulations on another successful fundraiser. But his mind remained with his daughter, hidden behind her column, lost in her silent world. Across the ballroom, Nora Bennett clutched her worn canvas bag and tried not to feel overwhelmed. She had received the emergency call only 3 hours ago. The Children's Foundation needed someone to supervise the art therapy station, and her supervisor at the community center had volunteered her without asking. Nora had barely had time to change into the only dressy outfit she owned, a simple navy dress she had bought at a thrift store, before rushing across the city. Now she stood in the most magnificent room she had ever seen, surrounded by people wearing clothes that cost more than her monthly rent. She felt like an imposter, certain that someone would realize she did not belong and ask her to leave. "Find the art station in the East Wing Gallery," Patricia had told her curtly. "Keep the children engaged and make sure nothing gets damaged. We have priceless paintings in that room." Nora made her way through the crowd, keeping her eyes down, clutching her bag of art supplies. She had been working with children for 4 years, first as a volunteer while finishing her degree, then as a full-time art therapist at an underfunded community center. She loved her work, even if it barely paid enough to cover her student loans and rent for the tiny apartment she shared with her elderly neighbor. The gallery was quieter than the main ballroom, with only a few families browsing the exhibited paintings. Nora set up her station, laying out paper, crayons, watercolors, and clay. She had learned that children often expressed feelings through art that they could not put into words. Sometimes a simple drawing revealed more truth than an hour of conversation. She was arranging colored pencils when she sensed someone watching her. Turning, she found a little girl standing nearby, half hidden behind a door frame. The child had enormous brown eyes that held an ocean of sadness. She clutched a sketchbook to her chest like a shield. Nora smiled gently. "Hello there. Would you like to create something? I have lots of supplies." The girl did not respond, but she took one tentative step forward, then another. Nora noticed the expensive dress, the pearl hair clips, the quality of the leather sketchbook. This was not a child from the community programs. This was someone who belonged to this world of wealth and privilege. "You can sit here if you would like." Nora pulled out a chair and gestured to the art supplies. Sometimes it is nice to make something just for ourselves, not for anyone else to see. The girl moved closer, her eyes fixed on the array of materials. Slowly, she sat down and opened her sketchbook, revealing page after page of detailed drawings. Nora caught her breath. The skill was remarkable, but more striking was the emotion captured in each image. Lonely trees, empty rooms, birds with broken wings. "These are beautiful," Nora said softly, understanding flooding through her. "You have a real gift for showing feelings through art." The girl looked up, surprise flickering across her face. She picked up a pencil and began to draw on a fresh page. Nora watched, not interrupting, as an image emerged. A girl standing alone in a big house, surrounded by people who were not really seeing her. "That must feel very lonely," Nora said quietly. The girl's hand paused. She looked at Nora with an intensity that felt like a question, like hope and fear mixed together. Then she began to draw again, faster now, creating image after image. A woman with kind eyes, a garden full of flowers, a heart with cracks being mended with gold. Nora understood. She had worked with enough traumatized children to recognize what she was seeing. This child could not speak, but she was screaming through her art. "My name is Nora," she said gently. "And I think you and I understand each other, even without words." The girl wrote something at the bottom of her page and turned it toward Nora. In careful letters, she had written her name, Emma. At that moment, a presence filled the doorway. Nora looked up to find a man watching them, his dark eyes intense and unreadable. He was striking, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. But what caught Nora's attention was not his expensive suit or his obvious authority. It was the way he looked at the little girl with such profound love and pain that it made Nora's throat tighten. "Emma," the man said, his voice low and gentle. "Are you all right?" The girl nodded and showed him her drawings. The man's expression shifted, something cracking through his composed exterior. He looked at Nora with new awareness, as if truly seeing her for the first time. "Who are you?" he asked, not unkindly. "I'm Nora Bennett. I'm supervising the art station tonight. Your daughter is incredibly talented." Victor Hastings studied the young woman before him. She was not dressed like his usual guests, and she did not carry herself with the practiced confidence of his social circle. But there was something genuine in her eyes, something warm and unguarded that felt rare in his world. And more importantly, his daughter had shown her drawings to this stranger, something she rarely did with anyone. "Emma has not spoken in 2 years," Victor said quietly, watching Nora's reaction carefully. Nora's expression filled with understanding, not pity. Sometimes words are the hardest way to communicate what we feel most deeply. Those simple words, spoken with such conviction, shifted something in the air between them. Victor found himself drawn to this woman's calm presence, to the way she looked at his daughter as if Emma was already whole, not broken. "Would you consider working with Emma?" Victor heard himself asking. "Privately, I mean, as her art therapist." Nora hesitated, aware of the vast distance between their worlds. "I work at a community center. I do not have the credentials your family would expect. But you have something more valuable," Victor said, glancing at his daughter's peaceful expression. "You see her?" In that moment, in a gallery full of priceless art, two people from different worlds made a connection that would change both their lives forever. They did not know it yet, but this was the beginning of a story about healing, about courage, and about a love that would grow in the spaces between words. 3 days after the charity gala, Nora stood outside the iron gates of the Hastings estate, her heart hammering against her ribs. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone driveway, and she could see the mansion rising in the distance like something from a movie. She had almost canceled twice, convinced that she was making a terrible mistake. But then she remembered Emma's eyes, the way the little girl had looked at her with desperate hope, and Nora had forced herself to come. The gates opened automatically, and she walked up the winding path, her second-hand bag slung over her shoulder. A housekeeper named Grace met her at the door, a warm woman in her 50s who smiled genuinely and led Nora through hallways lined with artwork that belonged in museums. Everything in the house whispered of wealth and taste, from the fresh flowers in crystal vases to the way sunlight filtered through silk curtains. Emma was waiting in a bright sunroom that overlooked the gardens. The child sat at a table covered with white paper, wearing jeans and a yellow sweater that made her look more like a regular little girl than the formal portrait Nora had met at the gala. When Emma saw Nora, her whole face lit up, and she waved enthusiastically. "Hello, Emma," Nora said, settling into the chair across from her. "I brought some special supplies today. Would you like to see?" Emma nodded eagerly, leaning forward as Nora unpacked her bag. She had brought clay, watercolors, fabric scraps, buttons, and ribbons. Tools that invited touch and texture, that encouraged expression beyond simple drawing. For the next hour, they worked side by side in comfortable silence. Nora did not push Emma to communicate. Instead, she created her own small sculpture, a bird taking flight, while Emma experimented with the clay. The little girl's hands moved with confidence, shaping and smoothing until a figure emerged. It was a girl and a woman, their hands joined together. "That is beautiful," Nora said softly. "Is that you and someone special?" Emma nodded and pointed to the woman figure, then to Nora. The gesture was clear. She was creating them together. The father's perspective, Victor, stood in the doorway watching the scene unfold. He had been working in his study when Grace told him the art therapist had arrived. He had intended to check in briefly and return to his conference calls. But something about the peaceful atmosphere in the sunroom held him there, unable to look away. He had seen Emma with dozens of therapists over the past 2 years. Professional, educated people with impressive credentials and expensive hourly rates. They had all tried different techniques, different approaches. Some had been patient, others more clinical. But none of them had created this kind of ease, this natural connection. Nora Bennett was different. She did not wear designer clothes or speak with the polished vocabulary of his usual circle. Her dress was simple, her shoes worn at the heels. But when she looked at Emma, there was something pure and genuine in her expression. She treated his daughter not as a project to fix, but as a person worth knowing. "Mr. Hastings," Nora said, noticing him in the doorway. "I hope we were not too loud." Victor stepped into the room, shaking his head. "Please call me Victor." "And you were not loud at all. I was just observing. Emma seems very comfortable with you." Nora smiled, glancing at the little girl who was now adding details to her sculpture. "She has a natural gift for expressing herself through art. It is an honor to work with her." Victor pulled up a chair, something he rarely did with Emma's other therapists. "Tell me about your approach. What makes art therapy different from traditional counseling?" Building trust, Nora explained her philosophy simply. "When words feel impossible or painful, creating something with our hands can release what we are holding inside. Emma is not broken or damaged. She is processing a profound loss in the way that feels safest to her. My job is not to force her to speak before she is ready, but to give her tools to express what she carries in her heart." Victor listened intently, struck by the way Nora spoke about his daughter. There was no pity. No clinical detachment, just respect and understanding, "My wife," Victor began, then paused, surprised at himself. He rarely spoke about Catherine to strangers. "My wife died suddenly." Emma found her that morning. "She has blamed herself, I think, even though there was nothing anyone could have done." Nora's eyes filled with compassion. "Grief is not logical. For children, it can feel like their words have power, like speaking might make the loss more real. Silence becomes protection. Yes, Victor said quietly. That is exactly what the psychologist said. But you are the first person who seems to understand it in a way that reaches her. Over the following weeks, Nora came to the estate 3 times each week. She worked with Emma for 2 hours each session, creating art projects that slowly, carefully, invited the little girl to explore her feelings. They made memory boxes filled with drawings of happy moments. They painted emotions in abstract colors. They built a miniature garden out of clay where flowers could grow even in winter. And something remarkable began to happen. Emma started to smile more. She laughed, silently but genuinely, at Nora's silly jokes. She brought her own ideas to the sessions, pulling Nora's hand to show her things she wanted to create. Crossing boundaries, Victor found reasons to spend time in the sunroom during Nora's visits. He would bring coffee and stay to watch. He began asking Nora questions about her work, about her life. She told him about growing up in a small apartment with her mother, a single parent who worked 2 jobs to put Nora through college. She spoke about the community center where she worked with children who had experienced homelessness, abuse, and neglect. Her world was so different from his, yet Victor found himself fascinated. Nora had a richness in her life that had nothing to do with money. She knew her neighbors by name. She volunteered at a soup kitchen on weekends. She saved her money carefully to help pay for her mother's medical bills. One afternoon, after Emma had fallen asleep on the sunroom couch, exhausted from a particularly intense art session, Victor and Nora sat together in the garden. The autumn air was crisp and leaves drifted down from the old oak trees. "You have given Emma something I could not," Victor said, his voice rough with emotion. "You have given her hope that she can heal." Nora shook her head gently. "I have only created space for her to find her own strength. But Victor, she needs you too. She needs to know that you are not afraid of her silence, that you love her exactly as she is right now." "I do love her," Victor said fiercely. "She is everything to me, then show her," Nora suggested. "Not by bringing in more therapists or trying to fix her, just by being present. Sit with her while she draws. Let her teach you her language, even if it has no words." An unexpected friendship, as the weeks turned into months. Something shifted between Victor and Nora. They began having conversations that stretched long after Emma's sessions ended. Victor found himself sharing things he had never told anyone. His fears about failing as a father. His guilt about working so much that he had missed Catherine's final months, too focused on a business deal to notice that she had been struggling with her health. Nora listened without judgment. She shared her own struggles, how she felt inadequate compared to the wealthy families who could afford better therapists for their children, how she worried that she was not doing enough, that her degree from a state school and her lack of connections meant she would never truly make a difference. "You make a difference every single day," Victor told her one evening as they walked through the garden while Emma played nearby. "You changed my daughter's life. You changed mine." Nora looked at him, something flickering in her eyes. Caution mixed with possibility. "We come from very different worlds, Victor. Does that matter?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. Before Nora could answer, Emma ran up to them, tugging on both their hands. She pulled them toward a flower bed where the last roses of autumn were blooming. Emma pointed to a red rose, then a white one, then gestured to Victor and Nora, bringing their hands together. The message was clear. Beauty existed in different forms, and together they created something more complete. In that moment, standing in the fading light with Emma between them, Victor and Nora both realized that something profound had begun to grow. Something neither of them had been looking for, but both of them desperately needed. The question was whether they would have the courage to let it bloom. The first hints of disapproval came quietly, like frost creeping across a window. Victor's business partner, a sharp-eyed man named Richard Thornton, stopped by the estate one afternoon unannounced. He found Victor in the garden with Nora and Emma, the 3 of them planting tulip bulbs for spring. Victor was laughing at something Nora had said, his hands covered in soil, looking more relaxed than Richard had seen him in years. That evening, Richard called. Victor, I need to speak with you about your personal affairs. People are talking. This art therapist you have hired. She is being seen with you rather frequently. She works with my daughter 3 times a week. Victor replied, his voice cooling. What exactly are people saying? You know how this looks. Richard continued carefully. A young woman from a modest background, suddenly spending significant time at your home. Your social circle is concerned that she might have ulterior motives. You are one of the wealthiest men in the state, Victor. You need to be careful about who you let into your life. Victor felt anger rising in his chest. Nora has been nothing but professional and kind. She has helped Emma more than anyone else has managed. I am sure she has, Richard said smoothly. But perception matters in our world. The Foundation Board is meeting next month to discuss expanding programs. Some members have expressed concern about your judgment lately. They worry you are becoming too emotionally involved with staff. After the call ended, Victor stood at his study window, watching the lights of the city spread below. He knew Richard was right about one thing. In his world, appearances held enormous power. A single rumor could damage reputations, affect business deals, influence board decisions. But when he thought about Nora, about the way she made Emma laugh, about the conversations they shared that left him feeling more alive than he had in years, he could not bring himself to care what his social circle thought. The pressure builds. The following week, Nora arrived for a session to find the atmosphere at the estate had changed. Grace, the housekeeper, greeted her with a worried expression. There have been some reporters outside the gates this morning. They were asking questions about you and Mr. Hastings. Nora's stomach dropped. About me? Why would reporters care about me? Grace hesitated. There was an article in the society pages. Someone suggested that you were pursuing Mr. Hastings for his money. It is complete nonsense, of course, but these things have a way of spreading. Nora felt heat flood her face. She had been so focused on helping Emma that she had not considered how her growing friendship with Victor might look to outsiders. She thought about leaving, about protecting both Victor and Emma from scandal. But when she saw Emma waiting eagerly in the sunroom, her latest drawings spread across the table, Nora could not bring herself to walk away. During the session, Emma seemed to sense Nora's distraction. The little girl kept touching Nora's hand, her brown eyes questioning. Finally, Emma drew a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands with dark scribbles surrounding them. She pointed to the scribbles and made a sweeping gesture as if pushing them away. You are right, Nora said softly, understanding. We should not let outside noise bother us. What we have together matters more. But the noise grew louder. Victor's mother, a formidable woman who lived in Boston, called to express her concerns. Friends from his business school days sent carefully worded messages suggesting he needed to think about his daughter's future, implying that associating with someone like Nora would damage Emma's social prospects. The worst came when the Foundation Board scheduled an emergency meeting. They wanted to discuss whether Victor's personal entanglements were affecting his ability to lead the charity his late wife had founded. The unspoken message was clear. Choose between Nora and the Foundation, between personal happiness and public duty. The breaking point. Victor sat across from Nora in the garden one evening after Emma had gone to bed. The October air had turned cold, and their breath misted in the lamplight. I need to tell you something, Victor began, his voice heavy. The Foundation Board is threatening to remove me as director. They claim my association with you is creating scandal that reflects poorly on Catherine's legacy. Nora's eyes filled with understanding and pain. Then you know what you have to do. Your late wife's foundation is important. Emma needs that connection to her mother. Do not do that, Victor said fiercely. Do not make this decision for me. Victor, look at our lives. Nora gestured helplessly. You have responsibilities, a position in society. I am a therapist who can barely pay my student loans. Your world will never accept me. And I do not want Emma caught in the middle of gossip and judgment. What do you want? Victor asked. Not what you think I need or what society demands. What do you want, Nora? Nora's voice broke. I want to stay. I want to help Emma heal. I want to spend evenings talking with you about everything and nothing. But wanting something does not make it right. Who decides what is right? Victor challenged. People who have never met you? Who judge you based on your bank account instead of your character? Before Nora could respond, a small figure appeared on the garden path. Emma stood in her pajamas, clutching her sketchbook. She had tears streaming down her face, and her whole body trembled. The moment everything changed, Emma walked straight to Nora and Victor, her hands shaking as she opened her sketchbook. Page after page showed the same scene. 3 figures together, happy and whole. Then another series showing Nora disappearing, leaving 2 figures alone and sad. Victor knelt beside his daughter. Emma, sweetheart, what is wrong? Emma looked at her father, then at Nora. Her mouth opened, working around words that had been locked inside for 2 years. Her face contorted with effort, and more tears fell. Stay. The word emerged as barely a whisper, rough and uncertain. Stay, please. The sound of his daughter's voice after so long struck Victor like lightning. Nora gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Emma turned to her father, and more words tumbled out, halting but determined. I need her, Daddy. Do not let her go. Do not let people take her away like they took Mommy. Victor gathered Emma into his arms, his own tears falling freely. I am right here, sweetheart. I am right here. Emma reached for Nora, pulling her into the embrace. When the 3 of them held each other in the garden under the stars, something fundamental shifted. This was not about society's approval or foundation boards or proper protocol. This was about love in its purest form. A child's need, a father's devotion, and a woman's courage to stay despite fear. The choice. The next morning, Victor called an emergency meeting with the foundation board. He stood before them in his conference room, his expression calm but unyielding. My daughter spoke last night for the first time in 2 years. She spoke because Nora Bennett created a safe space for her to heal. She spoke because love and patience and genuine care gave her the courage to try. If this board cannot see the value in that, if you would rather protect appearances than honor the true spirit of what my wife wanted this foundation to represent, then I will step down. The room fell silent. Then the oldest board member, a woman who had known Catherine, spoke. Your wife would have wanted Emma's healing above all else. Perhaps we have forgotten what truly matters. One by one, the other members nodded. The motion to remove Victor was withdrawn. When Victor returned home, he found Nora in the sunroom with Emma. They were working on a painting together. Their heads bent close, both of them smiling. I am not going anywhere, Victor said from the doorway, and neither are you if you will have us. Nora looked up, hope and love shining in her eyes. Us? Emma took both their hands and placed them together, her voice still soft but growing stronger. Family. We are family. In that sunroom, surrounded by paintings and clay sculptures and the evidence of healing, 3 people who had found each other across different worlds made a choice. They chose courage over fear, love over judgment, each other over everything else. And in the months that followed, as Emma's voice grew stronger and Nora became a permanent part of their lives, they discovered that the truest wealth had nothing to do with money. It lived in shared laughter, in patient understanding, in hands held tight through storms. It lived in the space between words where hearts learned to speak their own language. Sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the smallest acts of kindness. A waitress who signs to a lonely child, a therapist who sees beyond silence, a father who chooses his heart over his reputation. These moments change lives not because they are grand or dramatic, but because they are real. And real love, the kind that heals and transforms, is always worth fighting for. The end.